Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here. We just witnessed some amazing performances by our Ruckus Club Asian artists, some of which are here with us right now. Welcome to the first Ruckus Club Artist Roundtable, where we will be discussing the issues that face our community today, the Black Lives Matter movement, and our roles as Asian Americans and as citizens of our increasingly globalized world within that. Today we are joined by Boston-based Filipina DJ Hannah Inoy.
What's poppin', y'all? I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We got Taiwan-born and Vancouver-raised MC Malasung.
Yo, what's good, everybody? Blessed to be here, man.
We have Korean-Australian artist hailing from Sydney, Saint.
G'day from down under. Thank you for having me on board.
Real Aussie. All right, and we got Atlanta-based singer, rapper, songwriter Alan Z.
What's up, y'all? How you doing?
We got Chinese rapper and activist from LA, Jason Chu.
Yeah. What's up, Night Market, GGE? It's good to be with y'all. Let's go.
All right, we got Korean and K-Town, LA-based rapper Kiaro.
What up, y'all? It's nice to be here. Looking forward to talking with everyone.
We got Korean-born and LA-raised R&B artist and songwriter Aisha.
Hey guys, I'm Aisha. Nice to meet y'all.
Next, we have Wendy, a singer-songwriter and current student from my alma mater of USC. We have Catherine.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here.
There she is. All right, we got Catherine Ho, also a current USC student and singer, best known for a performance of Coldplay's Yellow for the 2018 film Crazy Rich Asians, which reached #1 on Spotify's viral global charts.
Hey everyone, really honored to be here and excited to learn a lot today. So thank you.
Repping the Triple D, Dallas, Texas, we have hip hop artist Drippy J, aka Jackie Faye, also USC.
What's good, everybody? 214. Thanks for having me.
All right, finally we have Milwaukee-based lifestyle and fashion blogger Everyday Drew.
What's going on? Holding it down in the Midwest.
And Joel Kim Booster, Korean and LA-based comedian and writer. You can see his stand-up featured on The Late Late Show with James Corden, Conan, Netflix, and Comedy Central, and is writing on popular shows including Big Mouth, The Other Two, Billy on the Street, and many others.
Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to be here.
And my name is Ozzy Nufable. I'm a Filipino-American born and raised in Los Angeles. My mom was born in the Philippines and immigrated here alone when she was 12 years old. My dad is also Filipino. He was born here in LA. I just had my virtual graduation from USC this past May from the Marshall School of Business and Thorne School of Music. Like you guys, I'm incredibly passionate about the entertainment industry. And because I'm Asian American who has experienced predominantly white spaces for the entirety of my adult life, I also have a passion for social justice. And I'm really inspired by everyone that chose to be here for a vulnerable but necessary dialogue for a social movement occurring at the time of a global pandemic. For our viewers listening, we hope that this conversation will allow you to gain insight into the unique experiences of Asian Americans in the entertainment industry. And for those of you that are Asian American, we hope that you are able to potentially resonate with this conversation and are motivated alongside of us to cultivate a more equitable society. So thank you all again for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. While signing petitions, going to protests, and pressuring your local officials to make the changes we hope to see are all ways to be active within your community. I truly believe that these conversations are, especially within our own communities, are extremely important. I always say to never underestimate the power of a single conversation. So I believe that what we're doing here by sitting down, utilizing our platforms and talking collaboratively with one another about how to confront issues of racism and prejudice really gives us a chance to make a difference. So with that, let's jump right into it. I wanted to ask everyone here about something that doesn't discriminate. How has COVID and quarantine affected everyone's daily lives up to this point? Has anyone learned anything new? Is there anything as a result of quarantine that you hope continues once restrictions are lifted?
So if I can just jump in quick, I actually disagree. I think COVID-19 does discriminate, and that's because our society is inequitable. I think if you look at it, right, Native, Black and brown populations are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. I have friends who are doing activism on Native reservations, and it is tearing through the Navajo Nation. It's tearing through Black communities. And so I think that something, you know, I'm guessing many of us on this call, this isn't new to us, but it's certainly present and visible in a way in society right now that it really hasn't been. It's been kind of hidden or able to be glossed over before, is the ways that healthcare, that certain job opportunities, that certain social systems of support fail certain racialized or certain gendered communities or whatever it is actually really coming to the forefront. And that's something that I think that COVID-19 has really pointed out to me and to some of the people around me.
I can piggyback off that really quick because I know, Ozzy, you didn't mean that, like, you know, like COVID discriminates or it doesn't discriminate. But also, what Jason is saying is also very, very true, is that, like, it does, like, it is very concentrated in certain areas. But then I think, Ozzy, you were mentioning, like, how Asians have been discriminated as the store proprietor of COVID, right? And so I think that's what he was touching up on. I think that you address that is also very important.
I just want to piggyback off of that as well and say that I agree with all three of you. And I think that, you know, I think it's common sense that a global pandemic doesn't discriminate against people, but what does is the American health system, right? Our healthcare system. And I think it's really clear who the government cares about right now. And just like you said, Jason, like, you know, the Navajo nations are being just totally forgotten about. And even like the simple, you know, everyone knows to wash their hands, right? For 20 seconds. That was like the very first piece of advice that we got. But, you know, this isn't possible in communities that don't have running water. So that already is, if you can wash your hands, that's a privilege. And I think it's so important to talk about because for all the reasons that we're here right now, right? I mean, gosh, if just the fact that we're able to be here together right now is a privilege, and I love that we're using this space to talk about this. And yeah, and even like tying this in with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I don't know if for people that are out of the States, but there's just so many videos that have been circulating of just like the way that the American police treat citizens, and it's night and day. Like there's videos of like, you know, police officers totally unmasked, just like running up on like homeless folks, people in subway systems in New York City, just kids, young Black kids. And then, you know, and then you see a picture of like white folks like picnicking in Dolores Park in San Francisco, right? And all of these like police officers are fully masked and then like handing masks out to them. So it's just it's very clear if you just see like night and day, you know, how they treat citizens and who they care about. So I'm just like so happy that we're talking about this, and I agree with all of you.
And something that I think is pretty interesting is that even though COVID-19 like brought about this like bizarre ass time period, I think it's starting to demystify this like American identity that that a lot of people believed in. Actually, it's almost like, you know, that moment in The Wizard of Oz where they pull back that curtain, it's just that motherfucker on a bike or whatever. I think that's what the pandemic is really doing to America, because it's like sort of bringing forth these cracks of like our fucked up healthcare system, how racist we've been. I don't think if you're American, if you were raised here, you know that America's always been racist, always has been for a very, very long time. And I think it's just like making it very clear to the rest of the world what our issues are. And so I think that's really important.
And going off of that, I really think the way the government has responded to the whole COVID-19 situation kind of shows where the country's priorities are in just protecting the wealthy. Because, you know, people are only given $1,200 to kind of live the rest of COVID. And now, you know, now there's a lot of economic pressure to get the economically vulnerable to get back into work, get back into situations in which they have to expose themselves to the risk, right? I think it's gonna push back on this, but for a while we're trying to open restaurants, and sure, we could take measures to protect those who are dining in, but it's almost impossible to socially distant people in the back, right? The cooks, the servers, the people who, you know, need to work. So I think, you know, going off the thing of COVID discrimination, it seems that our whole response has been, okay, if you're economically vulnerable, you are gonna have to put yourself in high risk. The fact that we gave all these small business loans to like the wealthy, but the people who needed the most got basically nothing. And of course, this is tied to the history of, you know, segregation, slavery, all this stuff, how wealth and builds up through generation is we see just affecting, I don't know, just the people who, yeah.
I think it also kind of forces like Asian Americans to confront our belonging in America. You know what I mean? Because I think like before COVID, I don't want to say like all of us, but like a lot of Asian people thought, okay, as long as, you know, you do good in school, you have a good job, and you just lay low, everything's going to be good for you. You know, you can just kind of skate by without, you know, like addressing microaggressions. But now with everything going on, especially because it's so rampant with the hate crimes and like overt racism, you can't hide from that no more. So I think it unlocked this level of like, I think like bravery in Asian Americans, especially people our age, because we're like, all right, we're not taking this no more, because it's like we've been told, hey, if you just stay out of trouble, you just make money, you're good. But it's like, no, like people don't care if you're rich or like poor. Like if you're Asian, you're a target. So I think like this has allowed us to like learn from like, I guess, people's prejudice. So it's like, okay, all right, if you're Asian American, you know for a fact that you can't just like pretend this stuff doesn't happen anymore. Now we have a responsibility to not only, you know what I'm saying, like learn how to stand up for ourselves, but also learn that the system affects every minority. And now we can take part in being a part of the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, I know I said COVID doesn't discriminate, but in terms of like catching in the virus, you know, but it also in terms of dialogue around it, especially in America, there's definitely been a racialized rebranding of COVID as the Chinese virus, you know, and I wanted to see if anyone had any thoughts on the effects of this on society on a national level, or if it's affected even your personal lives.
I mean, people been racist, and I don't think we should, not that I'm saying that it's not fucked up, I guess, we're talking about Donald Trump. We're talking about Donald Trump. And what is interesting to me though, is that sometimes after this happened, some Asian Americans were like gung-ho, like that's fucking racist, like this is some bullshit. And then like 2 weeks later, you know, the murder of George Floyd, and then all of a sudden you have all these Asian Americans being silent. And I think that's where some of the hypocrisy in Asian American civil rights activists have. It's always like, okay, like we're speaking up for Asian Americans, but for whatever reason, there's some silence and there's a lack of support for the Black community, which is why I think conversations like this is important. But to what Alan was saying earlier, actually, I just thought it was cool that you mentioned that, because I feel like my grandparents came here to escape, you know, whatever bullshit that they were going through. So their goal was to survive. Like they weren't trying to get mixed up in anybody else's bullshit. They were just trying to survive. And I think that's why, just from a generational perspective, like you, as an Asian American, you know, we don't want to insert ourselves into any position where we might lose out on our security. But if we are really to call ourselves Americans, in my opinion, we have to take part in American issues and take responsibility and ownership for whatever the fuck's going on. And I think part of that, and a lot of that, has to do with like the Black Lives Matter movement and standing up for racial justice, because it affects all of us. Like if it wasn't, it could easily be us. And it was flipped. The script was flipped like literally overnight as soon as Trump opened his mouth and said Chinese virus. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really the thing that's interesting about this moment with our community and its involvement with the Black Lives Matter movement is that, I don't know, I feel like over the last several years, there's been this sort of discussion around people of color versus whiteness and people of color versus whiteness. And now what's really coming to the fore, I think, in this current iteration of the discourse is we're learning that, like, yeah, people of color we're a whole, but there's also a lot of anti-Blackness within specific people, like, you know, racialized groups that aren't white, you know. And I think that, like, we as Asian Americans right now are really grappling with that. And you're seeing that in the discourse, what you were just talking about, Jackie, of like people who were up in arms about Chinese virus, but don't want to get involved in the fight for Black liberation. And I think that's really sort of, it's disappointing, but I think it's a really painful and a really important sort of process that we as an Asian American community need to come to terms with, is what are the ways in which we are being, what are the ways in which we are anti-Black, and what are the ways in which in that behavior sort of manifests and keeps, you know, our Black brothers and sisters down. And I think, like, it's not an easy conversation to have, but it's one that I'm glad, you know, that we're having here today.
Yeah, jumping off.
Oh shit.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Word. Go ahead, bro. Yeah.
All right. No, I just want to add a quick point to both what Jackie and Joel were saying. And for me, I mean, this is just a personal insight, and you guys can tell me if, like, you feel like if I'm wrong or not. But I kind of see it as the flip, the opposite. From my perspective, I see a lot of people of Asian descent rallying hella hard for Black Lives Matter, but never saying shit about Asians. That's what I see. So for me, I see it like, okay, everyone can go for the easy route, which is, you know, like what's most popular now, where you're not going to get hurt because everyone's rallying for the correct, politically correct movement, right? But being someone who wants to speak up for Asians, you don't get clout from that. You get clowned. You get gaslighted. You get told you shouldn't talk about it. It's not your time. So for me, I see differently. However, I do understand why it's important to support, you know, the Black community, especially as somebody like me who's been around the Black community like for half my life. But I think more Asian Americans need to speak up for ourselves too, because I don't see that at all. Like, I see barely any Asians speaking about anything that's like going on with our community. So I don't know, maybe it's just a perspective that I have that's, you know, because, you know, everyone sees, you know, like, I guess the world differently, but I don't know. So I guess I want to hear other people's opinions too, because that's how I see it, you know?
I respect that. I think maybe it's less about like clout associated with like movements, and more so you're saying I am standing up for Asians by standing up for Black Lives Matter, meaning like the two aren't mutually exclusive. You feel me?
Oh no, for sure. Yeah, no, I'm not saying for as far as like what I'm doing, but more so like, I guess, okay, so like when certain Asian Americans like online, right? They'll talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, they'll shit on other Asians while doing it. That's my issue, is like, instead of it being like, okay, as an Asian American, I understand that, you know, oppression, I understand struggle, I understand being discriminated against, so I will support other minorities because I understand how it feels. Instead, they're like, fuck Asians, I'm gonna go to this because it's gonna give me some clout. That's my issue with like how Asian Americans are handling it. So, global liberals.
Yeah, so I feel like everyone, again, like, you know, like Hannah said earlier, I feel like everyone's right? And I feel like we're all building towards this point of, so I was just on another call, I was leading a workshop talking about how the point actually is not, I would actually argue the point is not Black power, the point is not Asian American liberation, the point is the deconstruction of white privilege, white supremacy, and oppression, and ultimately capitalism, right? But because everything that we're talking about is not opposed to each other if we believe that there's enough for everyone. And I think that the way that white supremacy works is by saying there is this space for diversity, there's this space for justice, and you got to fight over that energy. When the reality is there's these vast fucking spaces in society that are just business as usual. And you look at this, you see the exact same thing with college admissions, right? When they're talking about affirmative action, and affirmative action has become this sort of tension point between financially or certain disenfranchised communities, and then what they consider, you know, in higher education to be a privileged Asian American community. Now, what's never challenged is legacy admissions. What's never challenged is, you know, athletic admissions, right? How are you going to have more spots open to fill a football team than you're going to have spots available for POC, right? But the way that white supremacy and the way that elite, that financial wealth works is that they tell you this is what you fight over. And so that's why I think, you know, kind of like we're all pointing towards is like solidarity between marginalized peoples to call out the bullshit of the system. Not to say, hey, we're going to fight over the 10% of their lives that people give to social justice. We're going to say, what's going on with the 90% of the world, the 90% of our lives that we're not even thinking about justice. We're just paying money to buy food and to give a bank, you know, the interest off our money. What's going on in all those spaces? And that's where like Lilla Watson, right, this indigenous Pacific Islander activist and her collective, right? She said famously, your liberation is bound up in mine. So we're gonna work together, not just to liberate you, not just to liberate me, but to achieve liberation together. That's kind of what I'm seeing.
I'm so happy that that we're talking about this and also connecting it to just like the bigger picture of like anti-capitalism, because I think you're right, Jason. Like I think like at least from the conversations that I've engaged in, and I'm in Boston in Massachusetts, so like a lot of it I feel like is wound up in identity politics, which I think is super important. Like I think it's really important to, you know, like find your identity and like, you know, own your Asianness. And I know I think that can literally save your life. But I think there's also, it can get really dangerous because, you know, like I remember when, you know, that like, yeah, everyone was talking about the Chinese virus and just being like hella fucking racist about it. And then you would hear stories about, you know, what was going down in China and, you know, people literally, you know, not giving service to Black people at Chinese restaurants. And it gets into this conversation where it's like, at least for me, you know, I'm talking to like my grandmother and I'm like trying to explain to her the importance of Black Lives Matter. And she's like, well, why should I care? You know, like they're being racist towards Black people in China. So why should I care? And, you know, that's a very valid, you know, position to take. And I think it really does come back to anti-capitalism, and it comes back to classism. And, you know, I think right now it's hard to have that conversation because it's kind of like, at least with like Asian elders or from like, you know, in Filipino culture, and I know it's going to be different for everyone else's culture, but at least for Filipino culture, it's kind of like, well, like, why should I care? And I think a lot of the times we respond and we'd be like, well, you know, like, look at all these times where like Black people showed up for us. Look at all these times where like Black people, you know, paved the way and showed solidarity for Asian people so that, you know, we can be here today. And I love that, but I also feel like it's a slippery slope because, you know, it shouldn't really be this transactional thing, right? Where we're like, okay, you helped us, so we're gonna help you now. Whereas, you know, like Jason said, you know, there's the super fucking wealthy, and then there's everybody else. And I think that is way more of a valid conversation to have, where like, you know, versus this like identity politics thing, and it's like you owe me and I owe you, this type of thing. Whereas like, you know, there's just one system, and like we all just need to fucking like take it down and be in solidarity with each other, right? Like not this like, yeah. So I've just been like snapping like in my head and also like physically like towards this conversation, but yeah.
Going off of that, I really agree. The fact that, you know, it's all about taking on the system, because there's this one book by Gary Okihiro, Mars and Mainstream. He has this chapter, is Yellow, Black, or White? And he kind of breaks down the history of Asian Americans, where, you know, a lot of Asian immigration patterns came after the end of slavery, where they, you know, a lot of like wealthy white people said, okay, how can we displace Black labor and kind of, you know, keep our power? Chinese immigration pattern, right? So they got a lot of Chinese workers here to sow this like division and to kind of keep their status in society. And you see, you know, yellowness being used kind of as a political weapon where their Asians are geared towards getting an identity that's more black or more white, depending on what the use for it is, right? So when, you know, it was like, okay, we got our labor, now we kind of don't like the Chinese people here, Chinese Exclusion Act, right? And then, okay, we kind of need more division. Okay, we're going to grant them a status of whiteness in society through a legal definition, so forth and so on. So I think it's really important to show solidarity in taking down this system that has pitted POC against each other. And another thing that I think is really hard to really fight for, I guess, Asian American identity politics is because we are not a monolith. There's like, you know, East Asian, South Asian, Middle Eastern, but for some reason we're all categorized into one group in America, and each little subset kind of has their own need in what this American system. So I think it's really, I don't know how I want to ask y'all how y'all navigate it. How do you navigate using your identity and your voice to kind of navigate being part of this, I guess, like artificial monolith? And is it kind of uncomfortable having to represent, you know, certain groups that you are not really as like familiar or exposed to?
Yeah, I mean, for me, so I was adopted. I'm a transracial adoptee. My parents are white. And so my connection to Asian, my Asian American identity has always been so disjointed. And it's always been a journey, and especially moving out to the West Coast from the Midwest and like being enmeshed in Asia. What is, like, we were talking about it before the call started, about what is Asian American, what is the Asian American identity? And it's so connected to our individual diasporas. Like a Chinese American person is going to have a completely different experience than a Filipino American. And yet, like you were saying, we're all lumped into it together. And it's like, what do I, like, I've always put my race, I've always considered myself Asian American first and Korean second, because I just I don't have like a specific connection to that Korean culture. But when I look at all of your faces, like looking back at me right now, all different you know, stripes of Asian American, it's amazing to me, and it's comforting to me to know that we are connected, and even in this sort of sort of messy way that America has sort of all lumped us all in together. It's comforting to me because we're creating what an Asian American identity is right now on this call and like through our work. And so that's really, it's exciting for me, but it's also confusing always, that journey.
So I think also, like Chiaro, love what you were saying. And really want to shout out our forefathers and foremothers, right, who came before us and blazed this trail. So it was actually Yuji Ichioka and Emma G, right, who originated the idea of Asian American. That phrase was literally never used before 1968, right? Because 1968, like Gary Okihiro covers, before that, it was just, yo, here's Chinese people, and there's a bunch of Filipinos who are colonized right now, and there's, you know, blah, 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 blah. There's, you know, adoptees, multiracial people, and we were all our own individual things. And I love and I completely agree that Asian American is not monolithic, but it is a chosen group identity that we buy into because we need that. You know what I'm saying? Like, and what I've learned from my mentors is that from day one, Asian American was never supposed to reduce the complexity of our communities and people, but it was supposed to give us an umbrella and something, mutual aid, right? So we come together as Asian Americans to say, hey, you know, Japanese American incarceration didn't touch my family, but that's part of our history, right? When my body is looked at, like Joel, when, you know, your family's white, but when your body's looked at in this country, your body's got to own that history. And if that history is going to be put on us, we're going to own it, and we're going to use that to uplift everybody. So I agree 100%, we're not a monolith. But what I love about Asian American identity is that we get, you know, this is the family we choose. This is the racial identity that we get to lift everybody up together with. And if it wasn't for being Asian American, I wouldn't know shit about Hmong people or Mien people. I wouldn't know any, you know, Pinoys. But because we're Asian American, we get to have that shared space to build something together.
I definitely agree with what everyone's saying, and I think what Joel was saying about being Asian American first before the his nationality, I resonate with that a lot too. You know, and I think like it's good that all of us can come together and be like and share this group identity, because before, like in our like motherlands, we're all tribalistic, like we all hate each other, right? But like as Americans, we're forced to love each other because no one else will. So it's like, all right, well, if all of us get called chinks and gooks and whatever, all right, then we're all gonna band together because we all share this trauma. So now through trauma and through pain, through struggle, we have this common language of, okay, we're gonna build together because we have all these similar immigrant experiences, or even if we don't, our parents do, or people that look like us do. So now we have this shared history. And kind of like what Jason said, it's like, if we were all tribalistic and was like, oh no, I'm Chinese, I don't fuck with Koreans, I'm Korean, I don't fuck with Japanese people, we would never learn about all this rich history that our ancestors have built for us. You know, like all these people that have paved the foundations, we can benefit from that and learn from them to grow as a people, you know. And I think what I was saying before about how Asian people don't want to stand up for other Asian people, I'm saying that because I feel like a lot of Asian Americans don't know their history. So once you know your history and know how rich it is, you're more willing to stand up for yourself. So
I just really wanted to quickly tie this like to when like Andrew Yang like responded to like all the hate, thank you, like all the hate crimes, like that's, yeah, we're throwing this in the trash, but like responded to like all the hate crimes and said like, you know, like what was it even, like I can't even like say it because it's painful, but he was like, yeah, like why don't we show that like, you know, we're actually truly American, right? That I think that's what he said. And like this whole like model minority myth, and I just wanted to tie it quickly to this conversation because like I feel like me like growing up as an Asian American in Massachusetts, in like literally like one of the only like 3 Asians in my high school, you know, the experience was always like, okay, like how can I fit in and like be white enough, you know, with my peers so that I don't stand out as like an Asian American, right? And like now it's like growing up, I'm like, fuck that, like fuck being white, like I'm Asian American and I love it. And then you know, you see Andrew Yang saying like, okay, like we got to show people that like we're truly American, like we're good Asians, right? And it's like, damn, like I don't know if I can get on board with that. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of tie this conversation into that.
The one thing that I want to say that's super cool, because it's really cool to meet you guys, because I'm from Canada, so I don't know too much about Asian American and all that stuff. But one thing that I find that's really cool about this whole thing and the internet is that, you know, we got a dude from, you know, Australia. I'm from Canada. There's probably like multiple different types of Asians, you know, Asian American, Asian Canadian, Asian European, you know. I think we're all over the world, and I think it would be a good time for all of us just to really connect and look at, you know, the things that we could do for our own peoples. You know what I mean? For example, something that I learned from this BLM movement that, and I think we can all agree that BLM is kind of stands for like, you know, going against oppression, right? That's kind of like the general consensus of it. And one thing that is happening recently and huge, but like we don't talk about it over here, it's the fact that Hong Kong is getting ate up by the CCP, you know? And that's something that I've been very going hard for, especially in Canada, because there's a lot of Cantonese, and especially in Vancouver, there's a lot of, you know, Chinese Canadians, and you know, we're all fighting for, you know, the liberation of Hong Kong. But you know, it's hard when, you know, there's so many other things going on, especially when Asians don't know too much about their own cultures. You know, they're not likely to care about what's going on over there, right? But a lot of, like, you know, rights and freedoms and all that stuff is really disappearing for those people that are living in Hong Kong. And, you know, that's something I feel like we can take this BLM energy, we can bring it back to, you know, our motherlands, you know, wherever we're from, and hopefully we could change something, you know?
Definitely. Thank you guys for sharing. something that everybody seemed to have touched on so far was this idea of racial triangulation, you know, where we have different minority groups pinned against one another. You know, we saw this before in the LA riots with, you know, Rodney King and the Korean communities in particular that were targeted. And, you know, the Korean communities really had to learn the hard way that not everyone can find success in the US. So what can we do as Asians to unite marginalized communities and, you know, kind of dispel this idea of the model minority? You know, I know, Joel, you have your whole stand-up segment titled Model Minority. So maybe we can all touch on that. What are ways that we can resolve this?
I think the biggest thing. Oh shit! What were we talking?
You go.
Wait, who was that? Who was that? I can't see. All right. Yo,
yeah.
So, what I wanted, I'm like super passionate about this because I want to like dismantle the model minority myth. Like I hate it so much because it's like it benefits no one but white people, right? Like we're not the proprietors that receive benefits from it. So, I think the one way we can like collectively destroy it is to understand that it doesn't exist and why it exists. You know what I'm saying? Like because it's a way for us to be used as a human shield against like all the struggles that Black and brown people face. So it's like when they have these, you know, like rights taken away, white people can use us to say, well, Asian people did it, so you guys can do it too. So instead of it being like something that we actually like work for, because you know Asian people love meritocracy and all that, they use that idea of meritocracy for us to pin it on other people. And now fucking Black people will hate us because they think that we're the white people's teacher's pet. And we're stuck in this bamboo ceiling that where we can't reach a certain level of privilege and benefits that America supposedly has. So it's like we're lied to and we're stuck in the crossfire between this Black and white struggle for, you know, like black and white struggle for like power and equality. So I think the best thing to do is to study what it really means and what it is and why we are not that, and to actively fight against it so that people that aren't Asian know that we're not the model minority either and why it's a dangerous myth. So
yeah, and also like that was dope, but I'm with that because I mean also the model minority statement is just like total bullshit, and it also erases like a bunch of Asian identities that don't even fall into that bucket. Like we all know Southeast Asians have a higher dropout rate than Black Americans, even like incarceration rate. They're already lumped in with East Asians. You know, there's like the Asians that immigrated with PhDs, and then there are the Asians that immigrated as refugees. You know what I mean? It like totally erases that identity. And then on top of that, puts us in this uncomfortable position against essentially other people of color, to then be a mechanism to further their oppression. It's such horseshit. And I think to answer the question, like, what can we do? I think Asian Americans have to, first of all, recognize the position that we're put in, and then have to make a conscious effort to ignore that and to deliberately say, fuck you. I'm not a fucking model minority. I'm not going to participate in this bullshit. I'm not going to help you kill Black and brown people. Yeah, I'm passionate about it too. So, yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, and then
Go. That's all you.
Yeah. So I think one other thing we could do to dispel the model minority myth, this is why I think art is kind of important, is there's this concept of pointillism, right? Which is an artwork made by, there's a bunch of dots that you just put on like a piece of paper. Individually, they're just dots, but together they form like a complete picture. And for me growing up, right, there was like no Asian American representation, and race was portrayed as a Black or white thing. And it was like really confusing just growing up. Like, you know, a lot of the people I grew up with, they're like, where do I fit? Do I fit in like Blackness or whiteness? And they would kind of just choose a side, and it was could be kind of like a weird thing because it was their interpretation of Blackness or whiteness, because you're not really in that culture. So I think just by being able to each individually share our own stories, because it's so rich and so different, maybe for the next generation, we'll just have like a more complete picture of the possibilities of who we can be, right? It's not just, okay, this is the only thing we could think of as minority myth, and a lot of people will just latch onto that as their identity, but they could be like, oh, I'm more like, you know, maybe like a Christian athlete like Jeremy Lin, or like more like a K-Town kid like Dumbfounded, or, you know, maybe I could like run for politics like Andrew Yang. I think that could be a very important way to dispel it. Another one, just like y'all said, learning more about Asian American history And you kind of see how Asian American history is a fight against system oppression, you know, the struggle and allyship. And by learning that, we can take pride in our like rich cultural heritage and hopefully continue to fight of those who came before us, and hopefully making life more just and more fair for just anyone living in the society.
Yeah, so I love that. What you're saying reminds me of, you know, Viet Nguyen, right? USC professor, award-winning novelist. He talks about narrative scarcity and narrative plenitude, right? And I think that part of how we break the model minority stereotype and the bamboo ceiling is by pushing narrative plenitude for Asian Americans, right? So there's a wide variety of what our bodies are allowed to do in this society. We can be, this is why I loved The Farewell, right? The first scene of The Farewell, when the aunt character is in the hospital and she's just crying. And I'd never gotten to see kind of like an auntie looking old, like Asian woman have that depth of emotion, right? So I love that. And I think for me also, another thing that I want to say is just, we gotta stop perpetuating this notion that Asian Americans are privileged, or that Asian Americans have it good in this society, right? Because I think that there's so much inertia, there's so much inertness that gets injected in our community when we're like, oh, you know, we'll get jokes or we'll get seen as, you know, oh, go where you really come from, but that's not real oppression. And that's bullshit, right? Psychological research has shown that exposure to racial microaggression has a stronger connection to PTSD symptoms than active combat duty. So racial microaggression is real trauma. You know what I'm saying? Asian American marginalization is real oppression, even if it doesn't play out. And I'm not arguing that, oh, we have it. We're not going to get into oppression Olympics here, but we also got to dig into the reality of what it's like to move through this country in an Asian American body and not shy away from the ways that is deleterious and negative and harmful to us, because that's where activism comes from, when we know how we're hurting and why we're hurting.
Yeah, maybe it's not, we're definitely not white, even if we try to be sometimes. But I do think that there's definitely a difference, and I'm not saying that you were saying this, but I do think that there's a difference, since we're talking about Black lives, between the immigrant experience, of course, and like the collective Black experience, specifically in America, which makes it sometimes so difficult to like talk to our families about it. Because I know when I bring it up, shit becomes like World War III up in this bitch. So yeah. Do y'all have trouble talking about this with your families?
I mean, yeah, I definitely do, because my family is white Trump supporters. So it's definitely not an easy thing. But I think like one thing that's been sort of helpful, I mean, because here's the thing, like my family, you know, politically are trash, but I know that they love me, and they, you know, they are concerned about my health and well-being as a person of color in this country, and they understand that racism exists. And I think one thing that's really helped me with them is breaking down the difference between sort of incidental racism that happens on a day-to-day level and structural racism, and like talking about the way in which our system is intrinsically sort of bent away from, you know, justice for Black and brown people specifically, and for Asian Americans as well, in many different ways. But I do think that like there's like a difference, and getting them to understand the difference between structural racism and like that is in the sort of the bones of this country, and incidental racism of someone calling me a chink, you know, on the train is a different experience and a different thing, and it's two different conversations to be had.
I think oh shit, I always cut you off. I'm sorry, whoever's talking, you can go ahead. Okay, all right. So what I was gonna add to this was like, I feel like one way we can kind of learn from each other, like in terms of like us as Asians, and then like from like our Black friends and brown, like Latino friends, is to have these kind of conversations too. for us to be able to kind of like talk about our traumas. So like with me growing up, I have, you know, like 90% Black friends. And so we have very open talks about race. So they like, if I'm like their only Asian friend, they know how hard it is for me in this country, right? So now they have this grasp of what it means to be Asian outside of what they learn from media. The same way that like, I'll learn from them about certain things that I may not even pick up. Like I'll give you an example. So I was in the mall with my best friend. I had a backpack on and I was putting stuff in my backpack. And he was like, yo, you know that if I was you and I did that, like we wouldn't be here right now. And I was like, what do you mean? You know, he's a big Black dude. So it's like, he was like, if I had a backpack on, I was putting stuff in my bag, like we get searched immediately. So just from that little experience that we had, it was like something that, you know, I had to evaluate. It's like, there's certain things that I can do that he can't. And then there's certain things that he can do that I can't. So it's like with these little interactions and us having these open discussions, we start learning more about like the things that we go through. Even though it's not the same, like everyone is saying, we all have these different like periods of trauma and like things that take away our humanity. And then we can learn from that. And then we'll know that, like you said, it's not the Apprentice Olympics. It's more so about, okay, all of us are fucked by the system. Maybe not equally, but in the same way. So now how do we come together to learn how to defeat the system, which is really what we need to do instead of fighting each other.
Well, one way to beat the system, I feel like, would be to educate, man. Like, for example, you know, most of you guys listen to hip hop, right? I mean, this is all in the roots of, you know, what they speak about. And a lot of the things that I've learned growing up, especially, yeah, when I came to Canada in the 1990s. You know, there was only 2 kids that were Asian in the school, man. That was me and my cousin, you know, and he was 12 years old and I was like 6. So I was always getting picked on by, you know, white people. But I couldn't understand any of it. That was like the biggest problem with me was I couldn't understand the English, and I didn't even know I was getting picked on. And what hip hop did for me was actually I learned English from looking at the lyrics, and I was able to have the ideologies that these rappers, you know, given me and talk about the oppressions that they've been through. And I feel like, you know, Alan does music, and, you know, like, you know, through our music, you know, we can potentially, you know, educate, you know, the youngins, you know, like the little sprouts that are coming up, you know. I feel like those are the people that we really need to engage and educate them on, you know, where we want us to be in the future. Because if we want to change something right now, it's way too late, man. It's way too late. Our parents were supposed to set us straight to this path, but because our parents led us to here, now it's our turn to, you know, take it for the next generation. And I think out of all of us here, I think that's our responsibility as entertainers or as influencers and whatnot. You know, that's kind of the spirit that we need to bring on and bring forward to the next, you know, 50 years, whatever, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's how we can solve this. You know, because we have like Andrew Yang. I'm not familiar with American politics, but you know, maybe we can have more of these kids going into politics and stuff, you know, and they can change, you know what I mean? Because in Canada, what's happening now is like, you know, we're following suit to what the Americans are doing. You know, there's definitely a lot of different races that are representing the parliaments in Canada, which is really dope. I mean, you guys are setting the setting the tone for, like, you know, the rest of the world. So yeah, I think being an Asian American, I think you guys got a big responsibility to, you know, really fork out it and bring it for the rest of the world, because, you know, everyone's watching you guys. So yeah, no pressure, guys.
I don't know, man. Canada's looking pretty good right now.
Yeah. I would way rather go to the hospital in your country, bro.
You know what's funny, man? Canadians would actually like to go to American hospitals more. They say that the technology here is just better, man. That's what I hear, bro. That's what I hear.
Nah, don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't believe the hype, right? Don't believe the hype.
We're around the streets, y'all got free healthcare though.
That is true to some extent, though. It's mostly for you know, the immediate, like, for example, if, you know, you had a cold or flu, you know, you get to go to doctors and the government will pay for that. But anything that's extra, for example, like if you need to have surgery done, but you know, it's not a necessity, you know, that you'll have to pay on your own. But there's also, like, you know, ups and downs to, you know, free healthcare too. There's way too many people trying to get healthcare. And that happened actually to my mom because she had glaucoma, so she was on the waiting list for like a year, you know, because there's so many people ahead of her in this free healthcare system that it took them a year, you know. And same with my other homie. He's an athlete, but he was for the Canadian Olympics. If it wasn't for him being in the Olympics, man, he injured his knee. He wouldn't have gotten that, you know, that healthcare that he needed to get back to being healthy. You know what I mean? So for everyone else that's, you know, working labor and whatnot, you know, those people have to wait in line, and sometimes it's like a year and a half, you know, to 2 years just to be on the surgery waiting list. And these people are, you know, sitting at home, they're handicapped, like they really can't work. And that's kind of like the downside. But yeah, having healthcare is really dope for, you know, just being able to go to the doctors whenever you need it, especially at times like, you know, the coronavirus and stuff like that. It really came in handy, especially, you know, the hospitals and stuff, you know, letting people in and all that stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, sorry to jump in. I'm learning so much from all your Asian American experiences. I'm really careful of how I speak, and I was speaking with Ozzy previously as well, because I don't want to say something that is directly opposing your experiences. And I know that the Asian American and the Asian Australian experiences could be vastly different. But going back to the question that Ozzy said, you know, what can we do to bridge the gap? And I personally learned Black culture through music and film. You know, hip hop albums like, you know, Wu-Tang 36, you know, films like Spike Lee, Friday. You know, that's where I got to approach Black culture. And naturally, as a hip hop artist, you know, we have a heritage of representing who you are and where you're from. And that was highlighted with, you know, East Coast, West Coast. You had to represent your borough. You know, you could be from New York, but you could be from like 5 different places, you know. And so when you are a hip hop artist, you naturally have to go back into, all right, who am I? What am I representing? What is my identity? And as a Korean Australian rapper, I had to dig deep to refine that identity. And, you know, naturally we gravitate towards, previously, you know, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have identified myself as a Korean Australian rapper. I would have just been an Australian rapper, and fuck anybody who said anything different. But because that heritage is so strong, and that the culture that I was brought up with, even if I was born and raised in Australia, I didn't speak a lick of English until I went to school. So that's 6 years of just Korean, you know, learning Korean family values, Korean culture embedded into me. So now I think the best way, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, you know, hip hop artists have done amazing things for the outside world to understand Black communities. You know, and that's a double-edged sword, always going to be. You know, people can look at it and be like, oh, you know, if you're a rapper and you're African American, you're definitely going to be talking about, you know, stunning. You're definitely going to be talking about money. You're definitely going to be talking about all this. But I'm sure that there are rappers like Common or, you know, or Killer Mike or J. Cole who aren't specifically talking about those cultures, and that's what helped bridges the gap. So to answer Ozzy's question, I think the best thing that we can do as Asian expats or Asian Canadian, Asian American, Asian Australian artists is that we need to continue to rep that. And whether that is going to be showing the good, bad, or ugly, or all 3 of them, I think that's the best way to bridge the gap, and keep continuously representing our identity. I think that shows solidarity, but that also empowers the upcoming generations to be able to represent who they are and what they are, and also make it less awkward of a conversation. You know, it is natural for me to rep that from now on. So that was just my 2 cents. But yes, free healthcare. Australia has that as well. It's good. And I really pray that you guys get that in America. I think it's bullshit that a first world country doesn't get that. So I'm praying for you guys. And I'm assuming the snaps is like a muted amen. Is that what that is? Is that what that is? Because I see Hannah doing this. And I'm like, is that a sound check? But I'll be clicking my fingers whenever you guys say some hellfire shit.
It's like when something resonates with you and you're like, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Sam brought up a really good point about like, especially as hip hop artists, right? Because, you know, obviously I'm a hip hop artist. And I think like when it comes to like identity, hip hop has shown a variety of what the Black experience is. So now us as Asian American, Asian Canadian, Asian Australian artists, I feel like we have that ability to now inform the world of who we are, to share our culture, to share our experiences, individual experiences growing up. And it's something that we probably couldn't have done years ago, because like Jin tried it with like, you know, with Rough Riders, and like, because the world at that time wasn't as perceptive, it seemed gimmicky. But now we're in this space now where it's more global, right? And Asian culture is slowly getting more like cooler with like K-pop, Asian cuisine, like K-dramas and shit like that. So now we have that ability to speak about our experiences without coming off like, oh, he's just trying to be a novelty. So I think now it's an important thing to put in your Asianness into lyrics. That's something I learned. And it's a conversation that I had with Jason like maybe years back. And we were talking about like, all right, me and him were obviously Asian. So if we're coming like, you know, into a space and people don't know us, the first thing they're gonna see is the Asian part. If you don't address that, that's always gonna be the elephant in the room. So how do you dispel all this while showing that you're dope is you hit that head on, but you do it with authenticity. You show them that this is what you're about, but you're also about other shit. Besides, you know, you're more than Asian, but you're also very proudly Asian. So I think we got to put in our own history, our culture, our identity, and why we belong, not only as Americans and Australians and Canadians, but as, you know, as artists, you know.
Man, dude, I love that, man, and it's funny because I thought I was the only one thinking that way, dude, and I'm glad there's like compadres here that, you know, like it the same way. So that's dope, man. That's dope. Look, Saint is going off there.
Did y'all have trouble coming to terms with like being proud of your Asianness? I know it took me a while, so just like curious for everybody else.
Yeah, man, definitely. Especially growing up, my cousin, because he was discriminated like crazy, because he was probably like the only Asian kid in that school before I arrived. So he hated being Asian. He told me to forget about the language. He says being Asian sucks, man. And when I was growing up, that's all I heard, you know. And so I try to forget the language, forget the culture. I try to be, you know, as white as I can be. And then one day I just kind of took the red pill, you know, and kind of just dabbled my feet in the Asian waters, and I just kind of got sucked in, and that's kind of how I found myself. And I feel like a lot of maybe Asian kids that are growing up in North America, we all have kind of like the identity issues, you know what I mean? Like a lot of times I don't want to identify that I am Asian because it's just not cool in the crowd. When I was growing up in school, at least, you know. And I don't know, is that how you guys feel too?
Yeah, it definitely took me a while to like be super proud to be Asian. And I think once I unlocked that, it opened the doors for me like just completely, which is something I thought would be the opposite. But I feel like as somebody who's been in the music industry for so long and been like fucked over by non-Asian executives and producers and managers and mentors and stuff, it made me hate myself for a very long time, because it's like when non-Asian people are trying to mold you and tell you who you're supposed to be, you start to feel like you're like an alien, like you don't belong, right? But I think once I just said fuck them to all of the people that didn't want me to be myself, and I started to like learn about my own history and learn to just be proud of just like being Asian, just Asian American, like it made me like so much closer to like people like you guys, to even my fans who aren't even Asian. Like most of my fans are not Asian, but they fuck with the energy hard in the sense of like, oh, this guy's super proud to be who he is, so I'm gonna love him because he loves himself, you know what I'm saying? So I think that energy of being prideful is so important, because it sets that standard. So now people that look like us that are younger can be proud of themselves too, because like growing up, like you said, like a lot of us said, like we didn't have any role models. So it's like, well, of course we want to be black, of course we want to be white. But now that we have access to this, you know, array of people that look like us, that have all these different positions that we want, you know, like Jeremy Lin, Andrew Yang, like all these different people, right? Like we have a reason to be proud, and we have this duty to, you know, just show that to the world. And I think once I came to grips with that, I felt like my biggest weakness became my biggest strength. I'm so fucking proud to be Asian, you know? So it's like, that's something I can like carry with me on my back and be proud to like represent for everyone that's Asian, you know?
Yeah, so this is the convo that Alan and I actually have a lot, which is like, I think, you know, speaking of like, I know a lot of us on here are hip hop artists, right? And I think when Asian people come into Black spaces and Black communities and Black art forms trying to be Black, we do not get fucked with. You know what I'm saying? Like, people do not mess with that energy when it's like, who the fuck are you? Like, you're literally trying to be an inferior version of something that already exists. But when we come in knowing ourselves and owning ourselves, like one of my best friends, he's a Taiwanese American guy from Detroit. He grew up in a black high school. And he and I talk a lot also about how when he operates in those spaces, fully knowing and owning himself, a lot of, the black community fucks with that because that's where they came from, right? That's where hip hop comes from. And people now, right? Hip hop is the biggest cultural, fashion, financial, pop culture juggernaut. But people forget that like 30, 40 years ago, hip hop was really disrespected, right? If you were hip hop, you couldn't get played on MTV. You couldn't get played on the radio. There was no Power 106, right? Like, hip hop came from a point of pushing through and saying, no one loves us, so we're gonna love ourselves. And I think now that's what the Asian American community really needs, is we need to understand the journey to get from kids who didn't have anything playing in, handball courts in the Bronx to winning every Billboard chart topper. You know what I'm saying? And we need to learn not just the superficial aspects of hip hop culture and Black popular culture, but we need to understand and internalize the fact that it's been a journey, and it's a journey of self-love. You know what I'm saying? It was never like, yo, we're gonna make hip hop to appeal to white America. We're gonna make hip hop that speaks for and from and by the community, and fuck what anybody else thinks. And then that's what made it so powerful and such an agent of transformation, right? Like, me wearing Supreme isn't gonna do shit, but me understanding where my parents come from and why they act the way they act and why white people treat them the way they treat them, that's what we have to learn, and that's what we have to give. And when we put that on the table, that's something that you can't get nowhere else. Because, if I'm just telling a version of a Black story in an Asian man's body, you can get better versions of that elsewhere. But if I'm telling an Asian American story in my Asian American body, that's something that I can be proud of, to go back to your question, Jackie.
Yeah, authenticity is key, especially as a hip hop artist. I think a lot of people think hip hop is like a lot of things. I mean, it's definitely Black, like, we can get that out of the way. But beyond that, I mean, it's all about, like, it started off with people just telling their stories, no matter how ugly or grotesque or fucked up it may sound. It was like a genuine expression of somebody's lived experience. So that's why I fucking love hip hop. I mean, it's like, it helped me express myself in a genuine way that other people could fuck with. So yeah, I'm with that. Shout out to hip hop and Black people. Black Lives Matter.
I just wanted to add to this conversation, like, I'm living for this conversation right now, and also, like, I think this is so important, just as like Asian people and as creatives. Like, where do we draw the line of cultural appropriation, right? Because we love this aspect of culture so much, and how as artists do we do our duty as honoring this culture that gives us so much joy and so much love. And I think that this is just such an important conversation to have, and especially as Asians trying to hone and create our own identity, and what does that mean? And I've seen a lot of questions posed to the Asian American community, like, who are we when we strip away all of these pieces of our culture that we've adapted and adopted from Black culture, right? Like, if we strip away everything that we love so much about Black culture that we have, inherited or incorporated into our identity, and, as our personalities as creatives, who are we? And I think when we get to the bottom of it, there's so much to Asian culture, and we have so much to offer. And I think that, it's just such an important conversation to have, because I feel like we can have these coexisting conversations where, we really do honor and respect Black culture, and we also can add, our own culture of Asianness. And I think it's really important to bring that to the table and have this, like, you know, this important conversation that, this existed before we were here, and we are honoring something that, the movements that made it possible for us to be here and for us to celebrate each other and celebrate music and to be here safely. And, I think it's important to think about all the ways that, we can celebrate Black culture and celebrate, these aspects of just like culture where in a way, like, we don't have to worry about our safety sometimes. We can show up into these spaces and like we're able to do things that, a lot of the times Black people aren't, without being criticized, without being, killed. And I think that's just such an important part of this conversation, because I think there is a fine line between cultural appropriation and between, honoring and celebrating this culture that we just love so much, and we can add to. It's not something that, that we're taking or colonizing, and it's something that we can bring to, the masses to kind of understand that this is something to be celebrated, right? This is not something that, we should be taking as our own. It's honestly like this culture that, that we have the privilege of enjoying. And, and especially with like, since George Floyd died, I mean, I've seen a lot about, a lot of people say that like, America just doesn't deserve Black excellence. And I think that's just so important, because if you're talking about Black people dying, you have to be talking about that as much as you are talking about Black people excelling. And I think that's just so important to tie together, because when we come together, we're not only celebrating Black excellence and just like Black magnificence, we're also celebrating the fact that Black people have put in so much labor, to just say, we deserve to be here. And I think that that's just so important, that as Asian people, we just get on that train and we say like, yes, like Black people deserve to be here. They deserve to be celebrated. They deserve to be alive. And that's something that we love and enjoy. And, that's just what it is.
And like the best way to honor hip hop is to like support Black people and support their lives. Like you can't just like Sue Beth can't just be wearing box braids, like, and then just being like all lives matter. Like, what the fuck, Karen? That's not how this shit works. I saw a tweet, and this is gonna totally ruin your eloquent everything that you just said, but it was like, how is she gonna keep her mouth open for Black dick but closed on Black issues? And I thought that was
literally.
Yeah. So I'm with that.
I feel like there's always been this natural exchange between our community and the Black community, right? So like if we talk about like Asian Americans loving hip hop, we also have to talk about the fact that Black people love anime. Like the reason I'm watching anime is because of my friends. Like I refuse to watch it, and they're like, bro, you gotta watch it, right? So there's that, and there's like this fascination with martial arts that has been going on before I was even born. Like we're talking about like, like Wu-Tang and with 36 Chambers, and like Bruce Lee teaching like Black students, and like the, Bruce Leroy, all this different like exchanges. So it's like there's always been this appreciation and like exchange going on. But I think I can see why people think it's so difficult to have these conversations now, because in this new age, hip hop is so commodified. Back in the day, like Jason said, it was something that to be looked down upon. Like if you were hip hop, people looked at you like you were trash, because it was associated with so many negative connotations. Now that hip hop is the biggest genre in the world, it's so mainstream that it feels like when anyone jumps on, it's like, oh, you're trying to just get on, you're trying to profit off of something, So I think the biggest way to show that you're not appropriating is to really, like Jackie was saying, you honor it and you learn the history. Like me, I'm the biggest rap nerd, which is why like I go into any space and I just start debating with people about their top 5, and we just become friends then. But I feel like it's really important to like, if you're really about like a certain culture that isn't yours, is to learn everything about it. Not because you have to, but because you should want to, because you're stepping into someone else's space. So you got to know what your responsibilities are.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys. Real quick, I wanted to talk about Asians within the entertainment industry. I thought what Jason said earlier about, being proud about being Asian and that authenticity that Jackie mentioned, like, these are questions that I've honestly had for myself. So, like, being here and hearing all you guys talk about this has been really eye-opening and I think really special. But yeah, we have Catherine Ho here, whose performance of Coldplay's song reached virility through Crazy Rich Asians, which was so pivotal for the Asian community since it had such a huge commercial success. And it was the first film done by a major Hollywood studio to feature an all Asian descent cast since Joy Luck Club, from which this festival is named from. But what I've personally noticed is that, and from putting this event together, is that Asian American artists tend to find their own niche within Asian communities and kind of struggle to get recognition from outside of that. Do any of you guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I've just got one thing that an experience of mine that may relate to Asian Americans. But I think because we have been so underrepresented for decades or years or whatever it may be, the business or the industry would be less likely to take a chance on us. I see it like that. I don't really blame them. You want a sure thing, but having said that, you liken it to, like, why do male Real Madrid players get paid more than women Real Madrid players? And the answer could be because they sell more tickets and it's more entertaining or whatever it may be. But if you go back to Asians being looked over or they're not really given a chance, I think that's just, without sounding too negative or too morose, it's just the way it's going to be for now, and it's just going to be bloody for us because we're the first ones through the window, through the glass. But having said that, you look at, this is a cliche, but you look at Eminem. I'm sure when people first saw, his debut single, people are like, oh, fuck this white kid, fuck this cunt, where's he coming from? But one album later, he got recognized, and I think that's the onus on all minorities. It's people are going to look at you through colored glasses, but you just got to be recognized through your ability, through your art, through your craft, and through your work ethic. That's just going to come through in the end. So all in all, I think that's just the short stick that we're being offered. That's just the way it is. Doesn't mean that we accept it, but the best way through that is just being recognized for our talent and through our craft. And I don't mean for this to be too offensive, but yeah, that's
I'm gonna pick it up and turn that negative to a positive. I actually do blame them. I blame the companies completely because they have the ability to make people, to who they are, right? So they don't take that chance because of prejudice and because of fear. But I mean, like, if green is the only language that we're speaking, then we should know that, like, BTS is like the biggest boy band group in the world, right? And the K-pop is taking over, and, like, 88 Rising is doing their thing, and then, like, Crazy Rich Asians broke box office records. So it's like, we're showing numbers. So now, like, we're more in the conversation than before. So it's like, I think it's just, like you said, it's more about show and prove. And I think from my personal experience, like, I actually work backwards. I'm not gonna lie to you. So, like, because like when I was younger, I learned from other Asian rappers just growing up and listening to them. They said that, like, yo, like, if you want to, like, make an impact, don't just stick to the Asian community, branch out. So I started out, like, performing in Black spaces. Like, I've always been more, like, associated with, like, the Black community in terms of, like, just my artistry. And now I'm like pilgrimaging my way back into, more Asian people, just because I want to get connected more with my community. So I feel like there's really no right or wrong way to do it. It's just about being authentic, but also showing, like, on the business side that you have the metrics to prove that you can, you can do numbers. So I think we all have that potential to do it because there's so many talented people, there's so many business-minded people, and there's just so much more people willing to listen to Asian artists and people that look like us,
Yeah, 100%. I agree with what you're saying. I don't think that it's not about, let's not blame them. It's not their fault, but I just don't think the energy of, hey, why aren't you giving us a shot? Fuck you to all these exec, fuck you Sony, fuck you Universal. Instead of spending the energy there, I think it's better for us to, like we just agreed on, show and prove. But it's also like, I read an interesting article, like, you know, BTS, they had a massive fan base globally before they made it big in America. Crazy Rich Asians is a Singapore-based American movie, hence, you know, Sinhalese, English-speaking Asian. And so it's hard to argue, and I agree with you, don't get me wrong, but it's hard to argue when we've seen no local homegrown talent be able to fuck with that level of whatever it may be, celebrity or recognition, whatever it may be. We haven't been able to see that even in, you know, in Australia, right? But I think that's going to be the linchpin. You know, once we have a homegrown local, like even you look at 88 Rising, like how many of them are actually local Americans? Now I know one of them went viral as an Aussie, one was, you know, Indonesian. But until that happens, I don't think, if I was not Asian and I was looking at them, it's like, oh yeah, it's just a gimmick. It's gonna, a year later, everyone's going to forget about the whole yellow fever thing, right? But I think once we have more established and we've got sustainability within the community, I think, you know, that's why I think what Aussie is doing great, or what Aussie is doing is great, and what Joy Ruckus is doing is great, is you're trying to create sustainability. You're trying to create a market that fucks with Asian American, Asian Australian, Asian Canadian, just that group. And once that you've got the sustainability, once you've got the fandom, once you've got, you know, people who fuck with the music and who identify, I think that's when, you know, this industry is going to be much more welcoming. But I don't blame the execs. I don't blame them. Like if my job was on the line to get CD sales, to get concert sales, to get merchandise sold, I would cater to the biggest demographic of the fan base. Like, you know, Eminem worked because so many white people wanted to listen to hip hop. You know, and you, like, Eminem came to Sydney December last year, and I had the blessing to go. You know, you don't see any minorities there. It's just white Australia, just 20,000, 50,000 seats. And you see that and you're like, yeah, they love hip hop, but don't get me wrong. It held him back culturally because he wasn't black, but it fucking made him, it helped him become mainstream because he was white as well. So I think, you know, that the sustainability, I think that's one. I think two is getting recognized for your talent, not being a gimmick, not trying to be in the next Keith Ape, you know, trying to be, you know, getting recognized for who you are. I think those two things are really what's going to elevate us here in Australia. I can't speak to what's in America, but that's our key focus right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing here. Like, just everyone trying to work as like the first Asian American, you know, like coming out just from America instead of it being imported as a fad from Asia, and then imported here to be, you know, like, oh, like this is the new Asian wave. Like, I mean, it kind of is, but the reality of it also is like a lot of companies and industries don't see us as like the prize, you know, like if it was to be like a decision between a white girl singer and an Asian girl singer, like who would they choose? You know, obviously the girl who's going to make more money. And so until like we do make things correct in society and the industry and all, like I think it's really important for us to keep fighting towards that.
Hopefully the Shang-Chi Marvel movie breaks records, because once that does, you know, that's going to be huge for you guys over there and Sydney and Australia.
And I think we can't discount the power of the internet. You know, we're talking about industry label, blah, 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 but it's like, we have the power of virality, you know what I mean? So we have the ability to make things shake within our own ecosystem. So I think that's something that we got to use to our advantage. And so we're not powerless. You know, it's like, even if we don't get that look, like, you know, we get passed on, it don't matter, because we have the ability to make people want to listen to us and fuck with us. And that's what's going to attract bigger higher ups to say, okay, I want to take a chance. So, you know.
Yeah, and I also want to just like jump in and say, like, we can never separate like music from other like entertainment media, because also like film and television, they're also like very important mainstream media. And then if we want to like really like enhance the Asian exposure in the whole society, we can never forget those medium too. So being like Asian musical artists, I just feel like we should also like incorporate our music, including with other medium, to like overall like very enhance our exposure on the whole society, like because Asian as a whole, we are also like in many other like entertainment fields. So being like if we can infiltrate that whole like medium and entertainment as a whole, maybe we can like overall like increase the virality, like just as you said, in the whole society. Yeah.
Sweet. Thank you guys. You know, as we're wrapping up on time, I just want to say, for those of us that are based in America, we definitely hold the largest responsibility of trying to figure out how to make the world a more equitable place, you know. Typically, I mean, I'm sure the other Americans in here can also agree with me and say that in our school systems, we're taught that, like, you know, America does it right, and we oftentimes don't get to hear about how things are done in other parts of the world. So I'm really grateful that, you know, we have Malisung here and Saint from Australia, you know, to broaden our perspectives. But just to close out, I want to give everybody some time to say, you know, one last closing thing before we end the session here. So, Aisha, you're first alphabetically. You want to start? Oh, never mind. Alan Z, you're first alphabetically. You want to start?
What kind of closing words you want me to say? Or like, okay, all right. I want to see everybody, you know, reach their fullest potential. I want everybody to win. I'm rooting for all of us. Yeah, if you want to keep up with me, my name is Alan Z. You can follow me at Alan Z Music, ALANZ Music. You can find all my music on all streaming platforms.
All right, Aisha, anything?
Thank you guys for having me, and thank you guys for having this whole conversation. It really means a lot. And I hope that we can just keep fighting for the things that we believe in and for our community. And also find me on all platforms, Asia Worldwide, ASHYA Worldwide, everywhere. Thank you.
Everyday Drew.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I learned a lot from everyone. I come with maybe a unique perspective as I'm not a musical artist. I write about fashion, and the one takeaway from today's conversation is representation matters. I mean, the reason why I talk about fashion, why I write about fashion, why I take pictures of myself is I didn't see people that look like me in GQ or Esquire when I was growing up. And I've had the opportunity to work with large brands. I've been in GQ now, and it's really cool to be able to pass that down to the next generation. So no matter what you're doing, remember that people are watching, and you're inspiring someone. And if you want to find me, Everyday Drew on all channels. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Catherine?
Hey everyone, sorry I was quiet during this whole time, but I was just really absorbing everything that everyone was saying, and I learned so much. And my main takeaway from this roundtable was I didn't realize how connected everything was. I feel like I've been really used to talking about things and like, okay, now we're going to talk about Asian representation, now we're going to talk about COVID, now we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter. But I really just realized how interconnected all of these issues are. And yeah, I'm just really inspired hearing everything you guys have to say. I feel like I personally still have a really long way to go in order to be as educated as you guys and as educated as I want for myself. So thank you guys so much. And yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at catho.de to keep up with my music journey. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Jackie, what you got?
No justice, no peace. I guess that's it. My name is Jackie Faye, aka Triple J. Follow me on all social platforms. Got Jackie. Thanks for having me. This was dope. Thank you guys. It was really cool. Also to just meet. I've never seen an Asian Australian person, so it was really cool.
All right, Malisung.
Well, man, just so happy to meet everybody here, man. I didn't know there were so many people from so many different places. Glad to hear everybody's different backgrounds and stuff like that, man. I appreciate being on here. Thanks to, Joy Rich, and, everyone that's here. And I hope all these musicians here, you know, we talk about like community and all that shit. I hope you guys would, you know, reach out and we can like collab or something, because I mean, there's something moving forward, you know. Community, let's do it. But anyways, I'm Malasong. I'm part of Spicy Gang, so you can follow my social media, malasong.spicygang, and I'll see you guys next time.
Solid. Saint, anything?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for having me and bearing with my accent as well. It's been really good to see an active community. You guys are like the big brothers for New Zealand and Australia, and I'm sure for Canada as well to an extent. You know, what's happening in America, we are looking to you guys to lead the way, as heavy as that burden is, that's the truth. So good luck, stay safe, and thank you for organizing this meet and the festival to come. You can follow me on Instagram, saint.alphabetOOO, and hopefully we can connect. Thank you.
All right, Wendy.
I just want to say thank you very much for having me here, and I just want to say maybe one day when we get on any like music festival and thing, and when we board on the stage, we don't need to introduce ourselves as Asian American artists anymore, because everybody knows that we are there and we became the mainstream. I just hope that one day we can reach that stage that we don't need to like enhance our like ethnicity anymore, because it's already there. Everyone will be like, yeah, that's it, and we have to show them that. I just hope that yeah, that's it. My Instagram is wwndidin, and thank you very much.
Sweet. And finally, Kiara.
Really love talking with y'all. I feel like I learned a lot and got a lot out of these conversations. I wish everyone the best of luck on their artist journey, and hopefully our paths will cross again one day. And in the future, maybe we can collaborate. That'd be pretty cool. And yeah, good luck with y'all, and hopefully y'all keep making strides.
Sweet.
I'm gonna take you up on that, bro.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. You know, I definitely learned a lot just from being here and listening to you guys. I had like a ton of questions prepared in case we got tripped up, but you know, you guys kept the conversation going and talked about some very heavy but really necessary things that our community needs to hear in particular. So I hope that, you know, our viewers that are listening, I hope you guys learned something as well, and I hope you're inspired to, you know, carry on this conversation elsewhere with your friends and family. You know, in addition to signing petitions, you know, like I said, pressuring your local officials, these conversations are very important. So yeah, again, thank you guys so much for being here. I had a great time. I hope you all did too. And hopefully we get to keep doing this in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ozzy. Yeah.
All right, sweet. I guess we'll cut the recording.
Yeah, I gotta go.
All right.
Bye.
Peace, guys.
See you later, guys.
Peace.
All right, guys. Peace, man. Nice meeting y'all.
And you as well.
Oh, what's up, Bobby?
Oh, shit.